right, welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you had a lovely break, got something to eat, maybe a little something to drink. We're now entering early adulthood. So, Pioneer, do you have any questions about this particular phase of life?
Yes. Will we use money? Will we find love with robots? Will we be controlled by tech? What will we wear? And how will it help us?
Well, I live in Japan, and I can tell you people are already finding love with robots. But be that as it may, those are very interesting questions, and they're going to help guide our discussion through this phase, early adulthood. And here to tell us more about the future of finance, please welcome from Mangrove Capital Partners and the chairman of Wix, Mark Toulouse.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm my first time in Vienna. I'm excited to be here, and I'm particularly excited to introduce my friend Jeff. Jeff is the co-founder of Skype. I knew Jeff many, many years ago, and he is now the co-founder of a new company called Oriente. Jeff has learned so many lessons across the Skype life, which is how to scale a business, what the tenacity is required to actually be successful there. And I thought today we would spend a bit of time kind of revisiting the past of Skype and why it was successful, and then really spend the focus on how and why Jeff chose to go from something that I thought was pretty cool, giving away free phone calls, to trying to change the world of money. So Jeff, thanks again for being here, and it's exciting. Tell us a little bit about, why was Skype so successful at the beginning?
Well, because we were solving, Mark was our first investor in Skype, so he was aware of some of these things. The most important thing is that we were solving a real problem. And what I've seen a lot from entrepreneurs very often is they're very much focused on building a technology first that they find very intellectually interesting to build, but it's not really solving a problem. So the reality was we started out as being a Wi-Fi sharing apps for PDAs before there were apps. Yeah. And then we realized that we were living in Stockholm, me and Nicholas. Jonas was in Denmark, and then Jan Talon and team was in Estonia, and it was very difficult to communicate. And it was expensive. So we basically, or Jan and built that, we were able to communicate better. So the point was, what I learned was solving a problem is a major thing, not trying to build a great technology.
So solving a problem is kind of one of the things I like to think about. And I always equate that to how do you tell a great story, right? So at Skype, our great story was simple, free calling. At Wix, where I'm the chairman, it's all about free websites. How important is storytelling when you're trying to articulate both to investors and to the market what you're doing?
And to employees and people that work with you. That's
right.
A very, very important thing, to have people understand what it is. And that's what I spend most of my time trying to do, is simplify what we're trying to do. Because I understand a lot is happening behind there. One of the benefits I have is and it actually sounds counterintuitive, is I have some very technical co-founders, but I'm not one of those. So I don't need to know every maturation of everything. So I'm able to kind of take a big picture and say, what are we trying to do here? And explain 90% of what we're trying to do, and not 100%.
So let's see how good you're at it, because tell us about your new baby now, Oriente, which is operating in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and soon many other Southeast Asia markets. First of all, what is it? And then kind of why Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so what it is we're basically enabling commerce between buyers and sellers, which is mostly merchants who are offline and buyers. So 97% of transactions are still offline. 2% of people have credit cards, and 70% of people don't have a bank account. So the big issue there is credit. People don't have an opportunity to get their hands on credit, and so that's what we're trying to solve for.
So people in that region are unbanked?
Yeah, they're very, very unbanked. So it's not, and also there's no credit bureaus, for example. So when you're living in markets like Austria or anywhere in the developed world, people tend to have good credit or bad credit. In these markets, they have credit or no credit. It's a very they don't have a it's not about just having you don't know who's good or bad. There's no information on these people.
So sometimes as an investor, I invest mostly in Europe and in Israel. And every time I go to Asia, I'm taken aback by the speed at which things get done out there. When was Oriente started, and how many employees do you have?
Yeah, so we launched in May. And we started about 18 months ago, and we've gone from 8 employees to about 1,700 employees. So we've grown very, very rapidly.
1,700 employees.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, and you have that. That's a very in China the same way. Things just happen at a much, much faster pace.
Yeah. And so, as I understand, your business model is an online and offline model.
Correct.
Right? This, for internet people, is often a bit surprising because you would think it's counterintuitive. Tell us why that's so important in those markets.
Because most of the things that are happening are offline. So basically, people shop offline. There's no real great logistics system. And another thing is that a lot of the money that goes through, because there's no bank accounts and there's no credit bureaus and credit cards, is that the gray economy thrives and cash economy thrives. So being offline and online is very, very critical. The interesting part was this was exactly like China was 12 to 15 years ago when we were at Skype doing what we were doing. That was the big thing, was the offline, acquiring people offline, bringing them onto your digital platform and capturing them there.
So Southeast Asia is about 650, 700 million people, so
Correct.
Larger than the European Union. Largely a forgotten market from the perspective of Europe,
Yep.
although we try to encourage all of our startups to think about it. You moved out there a number of years ago. What drove you to leave Europe and figure something out there?
Well, I think the optimism there is a very, very fun thing to be a part of. The average age in these markets is 24 years old. If you look at China, it's 41, Japan, it's 50, and in Europe, it's about 43.
Wow.
So it's a much, much younger population. Economic growth is 7% a year. So it's growing like wildfire. And people are truly excited about the future. And I think that's a really, really important thing.
Yeah, so as if you are a startup founder, Europe, of course, is a good place to be, but Southeast Asia sounds pretty exciting too, right? But one difference I have found in those markets is the need for local partners is truly important. And tell us a little bit about, your partners there and kind of what they bring to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, we learned this also at Skype. We did partnerships in each market. Li Kai-shing and Selena Chow were our bigger partners in China. But if you take our partner JG Summit, for example, these are family businesses. 85% of Filipinos, there's 100 million of them, buy something from JGS each month. So they own the biggest airline, the second biggest retailer. They own a bank. They own 30% of the biggest electric company. They have a ton of different, biggest food processing companies. So these have massive reach in these markets. So that's very, very important to us. And then Cinemas in Indonesia, 30 billion, a family business as well, 30 billion in revenue last year. Very big in banking, insurance, the biggest paper company in the world. They have a huge footprint in these markets. They're really, really important to what we do.
So it's very counterintuitive for me as an investor to think that these type of partnerships would work. At Skype we had none. At Wix we don't believe in them particularly. We think we're best in doing things on ourselves. And then when I reconnected with Jeff and his partners and they started telling me about this strategy, I became very curious about it and said to myself, can you succeed without it? And generally your answer is no, you need this.
Yeah, you need these partners to get going here. Because again, it's such an analog market. And I think that for anybody, entrepreneurs here that want to do things in Southeast Asia, it's important to understand that it's still very analog. It will rapidly shift, but it's a market where people are very technology literate, but yet on the other hand, the system and the infrastructure is not there yet. So you have to kind of have this in mind when you go there.
So you have offices in the Philippines, offices in Indonesia, and your tech is where?
Mostly in Shanghai and Taiwan. So we have about 260 engineers. Most of the team, one of my other co-founders was the first employee at a company called Lufax, which is a spin-off of Ping An.
Just for context, Lufax is a Chinese company valued today at about $45 billion, still privately held.
$2 billion in profit a year, too.
$2 billion in profit a year.
Yes.
That's a real company.
Yeah. So we brought that team together who's built this. And what's happened is that in China has some of the best fintech talent in the world. And it's an amazing shift over a 10 to 15 year period how They can go from when we were at Skype, we were importing engineers because China wasn't very good, and now we're exporting all that talent to Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So let's talk a little more about this online to offline and offline to online, right? How do they kind of feed off of each other?
Well, I think that's the thing. It's not that people only do offline or only do online. So first of all, for us, both those scenarios are how we get people onto our network. So for us, it's very, very important that from a credit side also, acquiring users offline is great because we see the customer, they put a down payment down, and they're buying a good. So it's also very good for us to do a risk assessment. Our salesperson is also our best person at taking to find out if this is actually a real person that we have to kind of be worried about or whatnot as a credit risk. So that's important as well.
So I think this is an interesting trend as you're thinking about it, this online to offline, offline to online. If you go to the US, Amazon has stores. This is becoming more of a reality. And we as a firm began thinking about this a number of years ago and by saying the real world is a world where you're going to do a bit of both.
Correct.
And so we certainly encourage all of our startups to think about that. How are you going to survive in a world that requires those two things, right? And money, of course, is a big one. So Southeast Asia is also a place where we keep talking and we keep hearing about the concept of this super app, the one-stop shop, right? Tell us a bit about that, how you fit into it, because there's two big ones in Southeast Asia, right? One is Grab and the other one is Gojek. Will they succeed? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think everyone will succeed, and everybody has their own idea of what success is. And so, the idea that you're going to be able to do everything yourself, I think, is a very, very difficult thing to do. I'm focused on 2 to 3 markets right now, doing one thing, and I'm exhausted running around. Trying to do 8 markets, doing all these kind of things is much more difficult. So I think it's going to be a challenge to be able to pull all that stuff off. The only place where you've had super apps be successful is China. And that took a place from a company called Tencent, who's a $500 billion company now, but they had 400 million users when they decided to try to go into all these different markets. So that's a big, big difference.
And they were a profitable,
very profitable
gaming company that could use that cash to do something else, right?
Yes.
So the super app, there is a super app in Barcelona, a company called Globo, for those of you who are interested. It's also a food delivery one, but they can do all sorts of other stuff. Very interesting company. But again, the real question is, can you finance other activities when you have a negative unit economics business?
That's a difficult thing to do as well, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a hard thing. And I think that if you're doing food delivery and transport, that's okay. If you're trying to do food delivery, transport, be a doctor, be a lot of other things, that becomes more challenging.
Yeah, okay. So storytelling, right?
Okay.
Give us the 2-minute pitch. If I'm a customer of yours, why would I want to take credit from you?
Well, I think that what we're trying to do in general is, again, we're trying to facilitate commerce. So what's happened is we're basically allowing people to get a virtual credit card. So what happens is that we allow people who come into department stores that we then see and whatnot, we'll give them a loan of about $100 US to buy something. But what we're also doing is we're allowing people who don't qualify for that, we're giving them a $5 loan to go to 7-Eleven, go to Mini Stop, these kind of things, to kind of build their credit up. So what we're doing is we're allowing people to build a credit profile themselves, which then will allow them over time to be able to buy anything they want in all of our merchant network, and also allow us to sort of sell other services or give you other services on top of that. Because in these particular markets, the lack of data is a real problem for people to get the things that they deserve. Okay. So we're not in the business of selling anyone else's data. What we're here to do is say, let's leverage what you have to kind of get services that you deserve. Because I mean, the average loan price in these places is 20 to 30% a month. So it's a big difference.
So I've been a very outspoken anti-fintech investor.
So have I.
My close friend
runs a fintech
company.
Yeah.
Yes, he did go to the dark side for a number of years, having gone from Skype. Then he went to became a venture capitalist at Atomico, co-founded the firm there as well. And fortunately for me and for him, he left and started Oriente. But I have been quite negative about this because every fintech company I happened to meet essentially thought that they could easily reinvent what banks had done for hundreds of years, right? So is your credit rating approach to figure out how people are using their phone and their mouses, or is there actually some knowledge that you're developing there?
Well, I think overall what you say is an interesting thing. If you look at what's happened, and there's been a lot of successful companies trying to reinvent banking in Europe that we've seen, and also in the US. And what that comes down to is that there's a lot of margin within these banking system. And like again, we talked yesterday like about new bank in Brazil. The NPS scores are very low. People hate their banks. In Europe and the U.S., there is a credit bureau. It's not great, but it works okay. Banks aren't perfect, but they work okay. So there's a little difference there. And the markets that we're talking about, again, over 50% of people borrow money from their family or from a loan shark each month. There is no system. So what we're doing is we're basically using a digital solution to build the whole entire infrastructure, which is very, very different that's happening kind of in Europe, where you're trying to say, okay, how do we disrupt an existing thing? Like a disrupting business. We're actually we're building from the beginning in scratch.
So you think of yourself as an infrastructure company?
We're an infrastructure, that's exactly what we are. In the same way, if you look at Alibaba when they got going compared to Amazon, Alibaba was like, there is no logistics company. The post office is awful. They had to build all of that themselves, and in the end, that makes an amazing end-to-end solution because they built it all from scratch. Yeah. Where Amazon could at least use the U.S. Postal Service or the Deutsche Post, all those kind of things. That's the difference.
You've raised over $150 million.
$150 million equity funding, yes.
Yeah, and then of course you have the loan book that you have to raise as well. Why is Southeast Asia so hot right now?
I mean, the demographics are fantastic and the growth rates are fantastic. What I do find interesting is how important it is for Japanese companies and Chinese companies who are investing a ton of money into the market, and you haven't done the same thing in Europe and the US. I don't know if it's just a longer flight or whatnot, but you haven't seen a lot of that. And we'll see if that kind of changes over time, because it's a great market to get involved in, and I'm surprised we haven't seen more Western companies in these markets.
And at the risk of you saying something you shouldn't, what are the next markets that you're going to go for?
Well, I don't know. We'll look at some, like there's a big one next door that starts with an I and ends with an A. That is something we could look at. Okay. And Vietnam as well. But the important thing is in these markets is that there's a lot of, it's a big job to do, and there's a lot of economic return you can kind of get just in these. If we just did Philippines and Indonesia, just think about that. That's already 350 million people. Just that. Yeah. Size of the United States. Yeah. People don't realize how big these places are.
Can you tell us a little bit about the amount of loans you've generated in the last, since you launched?
We're probably doing about 70 to 80,000 loans a month.
80,000 loans a month.
Yes, exactly. And our goal is growing out our merchant network and then kind of having our customers repeat loans. Yeah. We're not trying to make very long loans. We're going to have them use loans over and over again so we learn more about the customer.
So last question, we're about 10 years into a bull market. Everything is going well, right? Default rates are always low in bull markets. How have you been doing?
Who, me?
Your company, Oriente, in terms of managing defaults.
Very well, but I agree. I think the one thing that people always talk about is our competitors, Grab or Akulaku and whatnot. And the reality at the end of the day is that we won't have issues with our competitors until 1 or 2 more credit cycles. So we're much more focused on dealing with our loan book and that not blowing up than we are focused on our competitors.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. I have a few questions here, one from Jürgen. What knowledge that you got from Skype has helped you succeed at Oriente?
The ability to scale, that was the one thing. I now know how to scale a business. Silicon Valley is not better than European companies at coming up with ideas or building technology. It's that they know how to scale businesses better. And that's something that, you look at who's come out of Skype, Tavid from TransferWise who founded that, or Jan Talent, all these brilliant people. It's all we learn how to scale businesses. That last question's good.
Yeah. What's the best way to approach local partners in Southeast Asia? They must receive a lot of requests, of course.
You need to know somebody who knows somebody, and you must know somebody who knows them, that's for sure. And you'd be surprised how much they're happy to have help from other people. They want to be more digitally focused. They just don't know how.
So we're talking about these large conglomerates, right? Yeah. And they're looking for people who've had success in the past. And perhaps the last question, this is it. It's these apps, mostly talking about the super apps, are built on exploitation of workforce. Is that fair?
I think it's partially fair. Absolutely, it's fair. Is that it's doing a lot of good for the end consumer, but what is it doing for the workers, right? And I think that one thing that we do at Oriente, we very much want to play within the rules, and we want to make sure that we work with regulators. And I think it's important that the adverse worker doesn't get screwed. My father was a union president, so I'm kind of biased.
I will know today the IPO of Uber is coming up, right? So thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.